All right, let's hope so.
Good evening. Let's go ahead and get started if we can, please. Welcome to the Newark Public Library. I'm Michael Hill. Thank you all for coming out this evening. We have a lot to talk about, don't we? Hello? Oh, okay. I just want to make sure. I'm Michael Hill. I host Morning Edition on WNYC and Newark Today on WBGO. And I'm a graduate of Barringer High School. I'm not going to tell you which year, though. We are here tonight because New Jersey has long been considered one of the most segregated states in the nation. The data show that even as New Jersey is getting more diverse overall, Black and brown families and students are getting increasingly clustered. There are extreme examples. For instance, nearby in Glen Ridge, about 75% of students are white. In East Orange, only 1% of students are white. And here in Newark, the population is more than 90% Black or brown, and you can see it, especially at dismissal time in the afternoon. There's a lawsuit from the Latino Action Network, the NAACP, and others that seeks to prove New Jersey is violating its own constitution by letting this situation persist. The court finally issued a long-awaited ruling recognizing New Jersey has a responsibility to deal with segregation, but so far, no prescription for action. The case is likely to go on for some time. It's an issue a dozen newsrooms came together to explore this year through the Segregated NJ Collaborative, looking at how we got here and what segregation means for communities throughout the state. Our own WNYC newsroom and our partners in tonight's event, NJ Spotlight News and Chalkbeat Newark, all contributed to reporting that effort. You can find their stories at segregatednj.org. Later tonight, Chalkbeat's Jesse Gomez will lead a discussion with Newark students and community members examining their experiences with race, resources, and access to opportunity in schools. But first, I'm joined by two experts on the data and what it means for New Jersey students. Let's welcome Dr. Charles Payne, Director of the Joseph C. Dr. Payne directs the Joseph C. Cornwall Center for Metropolitan Studies at Rutgers University, Newark. This year, the center released studies on how opportunities to learn are distributed by race, ethnicity, and class, and about how segregation connects to inequities in school discipline. Also in the audience is Dr. Payne's colleague, Van Deen Campbell, the center's senior quantitative director. And our other panelists this evening, Colleen O'Day, a longtime data journalist with NJ Spotlight News, who dove deep into New Jersey's data on race and outcome for students to help all of our reporting partners better understand just how pervasive segregation is in New Jersey schools. Let's welcome our panelists. I also want to remind you about we have a survey that you can take over here and load with the QR code, or there's a paper survey as well we'd like you to participate in as well. Let's get started here. Let's start by defining our terms. There have been a number of studies that describe New Jersey schools as some of the most segregated in the nation, as I said, and both of your research affirms that. But what does that really mean to have the most segregated schools in the country? Dr. Payne, if you would.
Well, it's not the most.
Would you use your microphone there, please?
Sorry.
Yes.
Study that I think most folks feel to be authoritative. The study that most people consider authoritative, I think, is from Gary Orfield and the Civil Rights Project at UCLA, and they find that over a period of some years, New Jersey is between 4th and 5th, but it goes back and forth, but it's among the most segregated. And and there are different ways to make the cutoff. At what point do you say a school is a segregated school? Truth is, one of the things Van Deen has stepped out of the room, but one of the things that she found when she was going through the data. Oh, sorry, we thought you had stepped out of the room. We couldn't find you earlier. We set a relatively high mark for racial segregation. I think it was like 90% of racial minorities. But that was partly because if we set it at 80, it wouldn't make any difference. 70 wouldn't make any difference. 50, it wouldn't make any difference. The data looks like once a school becomes more than 50% non-white, it's going to become 90% non-white, right? It's going to move real fast. We don't find schools that are together. So all I am saying is there are various ways you can set the numerical cut points. We don't think analytically they make a lot of.
And Colleen?
Yeah, I okay. I have to hear how that sounds. And I think what Dr. Payne did also was look at economic segregation,
Yeah.
which goes even further beyond just looking at race and ethnicity, and that's really important too. Wouldn't you
Dr.
say?
Payne, talk about that, if you would. The economic, because this is, when you start talking about segregated schools in New Jersey, largely tied to where people live, because New Jersey mandates that you go to school where you live. There are some exceptions, of course, but for the most part, people live where, if you're of means, you tend to live where you want to live. If you're not someone of means, maybe you're kind of clustered in some of the urban areas. Is that right, Dr. Payne?
Yeah, I want to say a couple of things about that issue. Van Deen, who lives in the numbers, will always correct me if I'm wrong. So if I get interrupted, I'm used to it. Okay. But one of the things that's distinctive about New Jersey is that it does have several, for a relatively prosperous state, it does have several sizable pockets of low-income whites. You have the Pine Barrens on the one hand, you have the Delaware Bay communities on the other hand, where the economy was devastated in the 1950s, right? So you have some really low-income white populations that have been generationally poor in this state, okay? Now here's something else about it, right? Some of them, I can 90% certain what I'm gonna say, we haven't really run the data. Some of them seem to be quite high scoring districts, right? Only some of them. And some of them, right? Poverty, low achievement, what you'd expect, right? But we have low income districts, Villas, North Cape May, that are very close to very wealthy oceanside communities. And under state law, they have to share, the wealthy districts have to share revenues with the poor districts, right? In those cases, those poor white kids are academically doing quite well, right? So I just want to say that's a kind of New Jersey wrinkle or an exception to the normal pattern. The usual pattern in the data that we see is that when you have economic poverty is associated very consistently across a variety of different kinds of learning opportunities with having fewer of them. Poor white children get fewer learning opportunities, right? But the most devastating kind of context, and this is sort of laid out in the reports that you have in your hand, are contexts in which you have both racial segregation and economic segregation, right? The numbers for those, the learning opportunities in those contexts are dramatically lower than what you have when you only have economic.
Colleen, are there some alternatives out there? There have been attempts to address this kind of segregation, both in New Jersey and other states?
Yeah, so you talked about living, having to go to school in the neighborhood school where you live. We, dating back to the 1960s and 70s, there was a lot of effort in New Jersey as well as elsewhere in the nation about segregation. So we've got a couple of districts that are kind of where we had forced segregation. Englewood and Englewood Cliffs is one. The Morris School District is another. I spent most of my career actually working in Morris County, so I'm really familiar with the Morris School District, where it's that typical crazy Jersey donut and hole situation where you had this very wealthy Morris Township district on the outside, and then that hole was Morristown, which, had a lower income population and a more diverse population of, big, at that point, Black population. Now it's Black and brown population. They've had mixed results. And I think one of the things that has hampered them, and I fear this is what would happen in a lot of these cases, is that when you have a lot of wealthy folks who maybe don't want to deal with this situation, they just have the money to send their kids to a private school. And so a lot of that does happen. So you wind up kind of draining some of that, those kids out of the system. And you may still wind up with, if you're judging a school by test scores, which, unfortunately so many of us do, because it's hard to give the public any, like a quick answer. The scores don't look quite so good. But we've had some other interesting things happening in New Jersey. Montclair for a long period has operated on a magnet system where, and people can choose, the kids get essentially the same, education. Everybody's learning the same classes, but there's a twist. There's an element in it. If you're in an arts magnet, then there's going to be an emphasis on either music or dance or art, kind of in everything that happens there. South Orange Maplewood is really kind of in the middle now of something that's really exciting. And I hope it, continues to work well. I don't know if there are folks here who I see some people nodding, but they're calling it, I think it's an intentional integration initiative. And what they're doing is using things like race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, proximity to schools, where you live, interest, where your siblings maybe went, to kind of a couple of grades at a time, move kids around in the district to try to improve integration there. So that's still a work in progress, but I think it's really interesting.
Yes, Dr. Payne.
I just want to say something. I have not studied situations like that in New Jersey, but I do want to read you just one paragraph that summarizes what researchers know about the effects of desegregated children on desegregated education on both minority and majority children. For minority children, desegregated schooling is associated with improved academic achievement, higher lifetime earnings, higher professional status, longer, healthier lives. Some of these positive benefits continue on in the next generation. The longer students are exposed to desegregated schools, the larger the impact. For majority students, there is no negative impact on achievement and a very strong, lasting, and positive impact on their comfort with social diversity. This study does not say, others do say, that one of the things that majority students get from desegregated education is what researchers call democracy skills, right? Democracy skills means a tolerance for an ability to work with people whose opinions differ from you, right? And these times, we just need to know.
Dr. Payne, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm curious about something. When I start thinking about segregation in public schools in New Jersey, I wonder what the impact of that is. And here's my question. What do we know about learning in largely segregated Black and brown schools, the realities that seem to be accepted? Can you give us some examples? And how does it differ from white isolated schools or well-integrated schools?
Boy, that's a broad one.
Yes, it is.
You won't believe this, but I actually started to print out, before I left my office, a sheet that speaks to that sheet on Abbott districts, and it wouldn't come out right. Let me do what I can from memory. One of the most important things for us to realize, all of us who are concerned with this debate.
Dr. Payne, would you hold the mic closer to your mouth, please?
No, that wasn't a problem. I didn't know what to say. One of the problems that we have to, our expectations have been collectively suppressed, right? That is, we don't understand how much these kids can do, right? And again, I have worked with kids in the Mississippi Delta and on Chicago's West Side. I have seen the worst education in this country, I think, or some of it, and I've seen some of the best. I still don't know what these kids can do, right? I know how far some of them can come. So what I want to say, right, is that when we talk about segregated education as one thing, right, it's not one thing. Segregated education that is closely connected to the community, in which teachers have high levels of resources and high expectations for their children, that ain't so bad. That's the education my father had growing up and his siblings growing up in Cape May County, where they went into a legally segregated school where one door was for Black children and one door was for white children. And everybody I know in his generation thinks they were far better educated than the white kids. And they're probably right, right? I mean, some data that supports that. So that's one kind of segregation, right? And that's a place like Passaic, right? There are more kids in Passaic this year that will get passing grades on the AP than in the average New Jersey suburb. Okay? That's a high expectation process. And all I'm saying is that's what's possible, right? When adults line up resources and a certain determination and high expectations on behalf of children. Now that's possibility part, right? Now then there is the average part, all right? The average part is what we focus on, and that really is, on the one hand, I want to, in 50 years of studying and trying to understand schools, I have never gone into a school where I could not find a superior teacher, right? So be careful when we say segregated schooling. Let's also have respect for the work that educators in those buildings, at least some of them, are trying to do, right? But we put so many burdens on those things. We are trying to say the racially segregated schools in this state have about 80% low-income students, right? They have higher numbers of students who have learning needs, right? They have higher numbers of teachers who don't come to school regularly. One problem compounds the other problems, right? And so what does that do? It means that neither the students nor the teachers are typically working anywhere near what's possible for them, right? The environment sucks capacity out of teachers, parents, and students, right? And that's the more typical segregated environment.
Is it because those schools, because of the low income status, that dealing more with social and family issues instead of dealing with the focus on education in the classroom in the school?
I think I understand the question. If I misanswer it, come back at it.
That they're dealing with non-education issues because someone is low income status, because they may not have clean clothes, they may not have enough to eat, all these.
Somebody's working two jobs.
Somebody's working two jobs. Somebody's not focusing on someone's art project or science project and things like that.
I want to say two things. That's such a fundamental part of this discourse. Is it the family or is it the school? All those family things matter. Families can do much more than they are doing, right? And I'm perfectly happy to argue with families about what I want you to be doing. Right? At my age, Black folk will let you do that, right? Families do in fact matter. But I want to see if I can do this right.
Would you hold your mic closer,
I'm
please?
sorry.
Yes.
If you look at the school districts, urban districts in this country that are achieving at the highest levels, right? Kids in those districts are learning about 6 years worth of material in 5 years, right? That's better than most New Jersey suburban districts, right? That's really, really good, right? If you look at the school districts in this country with the lowest performance, in 5 years, those districts, students in those districts between 3rd and 8th grade are learning anywhere from 2, 3, 4 years worth of material, right? So the best districts with a lot of poor kids, 6 years worth of material. The worst, let's say 3 years worth of material. That's a 2-year gap, right? There is no way in the world we can explain that gap in terms of what's going on in the family. The families, the culture, the ghetto in those successful districts, not different from the unsuccessful. The difference is in adult practice and school practice. right? So all I'm saying is all those things are real, they're problematic, they have to be addressed. But that doesn't let schools off the hook. Schools have the capacity when they are organized and resourced and cultured sufficiently to respond to that for almost every child, right? Almost every child can be sort of brought up to mainstream achievement levels by the best schools.
Are you saying, because we've had a raging debate in my family about, and some with people who have been instructors and teachers, and it's my belief that, I'm not a teacher, is that when a kid shows up to school, that school needs to adapt to whatever that kid's needs are, because the school's purpose and mission is simply to educate that child. And whatever you need to do to make that environment conducive to learning, you as a school, you must go the extra mile, the other extra mile, the 5 miles, the 10 miles to do what you need to do to create that environment so that kid can learn.
I wish I could say it better, but you just said it all, right? And I know there are folk in this audience who have supported the community schools movement in Jersey. You continue to do that because community schools is exactly about that. And I will say one thing from, I think that a number of folk who have worked with teachers have observed. What you just said is much more appealing to younger teachers than to older teachers on the average, right? Younger teachers seem to be much more willing to say whatever the child needs. There is a segment of the older teachers who feel my job is to teach this curriculum, right? All that other stuff going on around, that's somebody else's job. Let the social worker fix that job, right? So there's variations in schools, and some of it is generational.
Well, I think some of the problem too is when you have teachers who maybe want to do that, but they're in a school district where there's an administration that doesn't support that. And the administrators say, you need to teach the curriculum
Get these scores.
and get the scores up, right? And that's what they're mostly focused on. And so the teachers feel like they can't, or they actually can't teach that way.
Right. How might we better set up students in New Jersey's more segregated schools for success? And what sorts of difficulties does segregation itself present when trying to do that?
You're looking at me.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to give sort of the topic sentences. I'm not going to try to elaborate. Because one of the things we have to stop doing, I'm convinced, we have to stop acting like this is an impossible thing to do. We need to stop acting like failure is abnormal. So I'm just going to run down a whole bunch of things, right? First of all, I mean, for that report in your hand, there's just a whole lot of obvious inequities in learning opportunities. Some kids don't have chemistry. Some kids don't have an adequate sequencing of courses. And I will say this, one of the things that Van Deen, I think, is helping all of us understand is that the order in which kids are allowed to take courses has some enormous consequences for what they're going to be able to study. So just though some kids don't have access to dual enrollment where they go into college while they're in high school, and yet you look at a place like Eastside. I should have the number in my head, but I don't. But I'm pretty sure that last June, they graduated a few hundred Eastside high school seniors, got their associate's degree the same day they got their high school diploma. Now, if Eastside can do it, right? Is there some magical reason why other schools can't? So there's just obvious learning opportunities that need to be equitable. One, Abbott is a jewel, right? Abbott had far more impact than a lot of us believe was possible, right? It's being underutilized. And too many low-income neighborhoods, the lowest income neighborhoods in the state, there are not enough kids enrolled. If they're enrolled, they're not coming at the rate that they should. I'm supposed to just be giving you topic sentences. I'm sorry. So do better with Abbott, right? One, I think it is some of the most successful districts in the state just don't let kids fail at the beginning of school. You put every resource you can find in the children between the age of 3 and the age of 8, and they can stay alive, right? If you want a broad generalization, if you can create context for children, right, in which adults have high expectations, in which there is a reasonable resource base, and in which there is a foundation of trust. I feel like I'm forgetting something. But let's start with high expectations, trust, and resources. If you can do that, you can do all kinds of programming. You can teach this way, you can teach that way. If you're teaching to high standards, right? The particular way in which you do that seems to not matter nearly as much as some of us thought of. You want to transfer a school? Take all the best teachers who are now teaching AP and honors classes and put them in regular track classes. You get better performance almost overnight, right? Now there's a price you pay for that. Okay, you want better performance? Take all the best principals in the state of New Jersey and send them to the inner city schools, right? You will get big pop out of that, right? And the biggest pop will be for the most disadvantaged students, right? The community schools I've already mentioned. I think the last thing I will say is don't forget the people who are adults but who have been victimized by segregated education or by inadequate education of some form. And by that, I mean the incarcerated, right? The incarcerated are the price we pay for an inequitable educational system. And so there was a time at which New Jersey was one of the best states in this country in terms of providing educational opportunities for people in prison. That time is long gone. So as we think about what the menu is, that needs to be there someplace. So anyway, those are places we can start.
Dr. Payne and Colleen, I want to ask this question about a response to the judge's ruling a couple of weeks ago. And the central question in all of this is, who fixes this and how when it comes to, if the word is desegregating New Jersey schools or integrating New Jersey schools? I know necessarily that may not be the same thing. What does a fix look like? What would fewer, larger districts look like if that's one of the solutions? Who would propose that and who would accept that? And Colleen, we're going to have you get into the political realities of that. But I want to lean on Dr. Payne here. Dr. Payne, what does a fix look like if the goal is to end segregation in New Jersey schools? So they're not the 6 most segregated schools in the country, if that's the goal. And if it's along racial and ethnic lines, that's one thing. But if it's along economic lines, as you point out in the state, what does a fix like that look like? Can you achieve a fix?
Colleen knows more about how you end segregation.
Would you put your mic up there, please? Yes.
I'm sure Colleen knows more about how you address segregation in that head-on fashion than I do. But I just want to go back to what I was trying to say before. Another way to say it is, the problem for me is not how you end segregation. The problem for me is how you end education that is, I was actually going to go back to an older generation's term, education that is for second-class citizenship, right? Because first-class education can happen in almost any context, right? Segregation makes it harder, but not impossible. And so that is a matter of what I was saying before. That's a matter of how we redirect resources, and maybe the most important resources are the human resources that we put in front of children.
So you're saying leave the schools, if they're segregated, leave them on, but just make sure they have the right resources so teachers can teach and students can learn and achieve?
I am saying that for me, Charles Payne, my goal as an educator and as an old man is to see that the generation that comes after me comes into adulthood with choices, right? That they can decide, I want to do this, I want to do that, and they're qualified to do, and that they can critique the choices. They got to have, they got to have some, and I would add, because I come out of a freedom school tradition, that they understand that their education is not theirs alone. It's also for whatever community that they agree with, and the community should benefit from the education. So that's my job, right? And I can do that job with the right resources and the right comrades in almost any context. But I do want to underscore, segregation makes it easier to cheat children, right? It makes it easier to take resources from children, easier to take hope from children, right?
Because they're discounted. They're not expected to. The expectations by some is lower,
That's exactly right.
and the resources aren't there. Good. Colleen, I'm interested from your perspective. Since this judge's ruling 3 weeks ago now, what have you heard about potential solutions before we get into the politics of it?
So, I think that one of the things that I was expecting might have come out of this was perhaps the idea of county school districts. That's something that is in maybe 12 or 14 other states. It's fairly common. We've got 555, I think, municipalities, 600 plus school districts, teeny tiny ones, massive ones like Newark. It just, when you have a system like that, I think you're bound to have these inequities. If you had a county school district in a Newark, in Essex County, then you wouldn't have, like a Glen Ridge or a Milburn that has, 90+% white children, and a Newark which has 90+% Black and brown children. Now, I think there also needs to be community buy-in. So, there are going to be, I think, some places where white people may not want it, Black people may not want it, Hispanic people may not want it. So ideally, this is something I think that should be, kind of start at the community level. But if you want to get into the politics, unfortunately, it seems like we don't have the kind of say that we think ideally we would have in a democracy. That's a hard thing to.
I'm curious, could you foresee a governor in New Jersey addressing this, a state legislature addressing this?
No and no. I mean, if any governor was going to do it,
one term?
Yeah, well, that's for sure. I certainly would have thought, Phil Murphy, when he came in and he talked about things like equity, and he talked about raising the minimum wage, and he's made community college more affordable, and there is some additional aid going to the state colleges. But his administration's response to the lawsuit was to delay, try to keep it, pushing it down the road in court. So there was none of that. How about trying a pilot program in a couple places in the state? None of that was ever discussed. And as for legislators, yeah, you're going to be out next time. So there's just not a lot of courage in our legislature.
I'm going to draw on your experiences. So how do you foresee this being addressed? This is my last question. To the satisfaction of a majority of the stakeholders in the system?
Well, I don't know if it will be a majority. That's a very good question. But I think when I envision this, and it will be years and years down the road, but I look at what the Supreme Court did decades ago with the Mount Laurel decisions, where they put in place rules that said that communities could no longer exclude low-income folks. You couldn't zone only for 5-acre lots. You have to allow a certain percentage of your new construction to be for low-income people, lower moderate income people. There have been various degrees of success to that. Some communities, few, have embraced it. Most have not. Many were tried and were able to essentially buy their way out by using regional contribution agreements, paying another town to take their their low-income housing. And that just perpetuates what we see today, which is, at the very least, economic segregation, where you've got, people in town that are still down here, whereas in neighboring suburbs, they're up here because they're just not, building that kind of housing. There have been some improvements there, but I could see the court, because it is known as a liberal court, kind of leaning in that direction and at least trying to again, the best idea that I have is this county kind of system, but at least maybe trying even just some neighborhood or some neighboring towns to make some, concessions and get together. But again, that's years down the road.
How about a hand for Dr. Payne and for Colleen? I know you have some questions for them, and let's reserve them for later in this program. Right now, let's have Chalk Beats Jesse Gomez lead that discussion with Newark students and community members.
Hello, hello. Good evening, everyone. Any order, pick any order. It's good. Awesome. Well, I'm so excited to see a lot of familiar faces in the room, even more excited to see even new ones. I'm very excited for this discussion, and I just hope that you folks take a lot away from this this evening. And if you have any questions, save them for the end. We're going to make sure to allot about 10 minutes for questions, and we'll have a mic going around in the room, and you have a chance to just pose any questions to any of the panelists here today. Are you guys doing good? Awesome. All right. So again, so our first panel, we just went over kind of the history of school segregation and why New Jersey schools are among the most segregated. And in Newark public schools, we know that Black and Latino students make up more than 90% of the population, while teachers from those backgrounds make up just over half of the teaching staff. But again, beyond fair representation and access to resources, systemic racial segregation in schools perpetuates racial prejudices, promotes a harmful cycle of racial inequities, affects students' emotional and mental well-being, and it takes a toll on students' desire to learn and succeed. So we're going to hear from two city leaders who are helping break those cycles through advocacy and education, and two young men who've gone to public schools here in Newark, and very excited for you all to hear a little bit about their experiences. So again, we know this is a huge problem, but there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. And so, as we're going to discuss how city and school leaders can create better learning environments for students of color, and again, just promote opportunities to address this issue in schools. So let's get into it. All right, so our panelists are David Allen. He is a senior at University High School. Give him a round of applause. Give him a round of applause. We also have Christian Martinez, who's a freshman at Keene University and a Newark Public Schools alumnus. Fun fact, he graduated from Behringer, just like Michael. And we also have Ms. Yvette Jordan, who is the chairperson for the Newark Education Workers Caucus and a history teacher. Give a round of applause. And last but not least, we have Mark Comesaña, the executive director of My Brother's Keeper here in Newark. One more round of applause. Awesome. So we're going to get right into this. Let's start off by talking about racial segregation in schools and socioeconomic segregation. So just first question to our students, and I'll start with you, David, and then you can chime in, Christian. David, what ways do you think segregation has affected your education and just your educational experience overall?
I would say the most prevalent way, having attended a predominantly Black high school and also a predominantly, or a high school where Black students were the minority, the main issue you could see, like the moment you walk in the door, is the difference in funding, like the way funding is allocated, the lack of resources predominantly Black schools receive as opposed to predominantly white schools or just non-Black schools in general. I think Black students usually receive the short end of the stick, especially because the people in control who decide where the money goes, they focus primarily on test scores and numbers and statistics and attendance, and they don't take into account, like, students don't want to come to school when it's 90 degrees outside and we don't have any air conditioner, or test scores are low because we aren't receiving proper education.
And I can also chime in on that. While at my time in Behringer, I saw a dramatic difference. I went to an Essex County school, which had abundant amount of funding, compared to a school here in Newark. The love for the school has not been shown, and you can see that as soon as you walk in the door. Overall, students did not want to participate in their school due to the fact of lower funding. You see these textbooks that are being up, and teachers who aren't like as passionate as you would assume them to be, teaching your class, and you see students who are less motivated. However, they do provide some resources, that doesn't like justify the fact that the school is like like it's under cared for. It's not shown any love at all. There's no love in the North school in the North Public Schools for Behringer. Um,
Do you have anything else to add, David?
No.
You good? Great. And that's an interesting point. I mean, as soon as you walk into a school, I mean, you can automatically tell if it's underfunded or not, you know, what the environment is like, what the culture is like. So Yvette and Mark, from your perspective as educators, how does school segregation impact the quality of education Newark students receive? And Yvette, you can go ahead first.
Well, the quality, hearing what you said, David and Christian, it just really impacts me, especially when you said, Christian, there's no love in the school. Just hearing that ripped at my heart. I was born and raised in New York on Staten Island. I was the only fly in the milk, or the only Black K through 12 where I attended school. And my education experience was extremely different from what I'm experiencing here as a teacher at Central High School, which is where I am a teacher. And although I own a house, my husband and I have lived here since '89. He grew up here, I didn't. I can see exactly what you're saying in terms of no love here from some people. And I think some of the experiences you have had as students really comes from who is teaching in the building, right? So for somebody who is an educator who is here and then goes home someplace else and may live in an outer suburb or an hour away, their experiences with someone who look like us is extremely different, and how they react also is different. So my experience in terms of segregation you asked is that it is prevalent, it is real. I know in my school, I've taught in 3 schools in Newark, West Side, Behringer, and now Central High School, which I've been for 5 or 6 years. And the experience I am seeing, when I got there, it was mostly African American, which it still is. However, it is changing. And the attitudes of the staff and faculty are also changing. And that needs to change also, which I'll expand upon later on.
Yeah. And Mark, what's your perspective? How does school segregation impact the quality of education Newark students receive?
So good evening, first of all. Thank you for having me on the panel to talk about this. My experience as a son of this city and a resident and someone who's raised or almost finished raising 3 children in this city, I actually think, and having attended public schools and actually attending a private school in this city where it was majority Latino, majority Black, it was an experience that I would not change. There was an affirmation that I experienced, seeing community at its best, seeing Blackness in all its beauty, that I cherished. My first Black male educator was when I was a freshman in high school. He was very clear on our responsibility as Black and brown boys to our community. And that experience carried me through my sophomore, junior, senior year of high school, where I had other Black and brown, particularly men, as educators. And so it maybe it's different and it's, maybe somewhat controversial, but I appreciated being in a community with people who looked like me, who were from my city, who were grappling with and talking about a lot of the same issues that I was dealing with as a young man growing up in this city. And it raises for me a question, which is a larger question we probably don't have time completely to talk about or explore today, which is how much, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot, how much of it has to do with segregation, some of these experiences that we're hearing, and how much of it has to do with other factors that are part of the ecosystem. Because I'm just being completely transparent, and I'll close at least with this. It is difficult for me to say that the reason we are having these challenges, and I'm not saying anyone is saying this explicitly, but that the reason these challenges are showing up is because the space is all Black and brown. And I just want to caution us to not draw that correlation, because I don't think that that's where the correlation should be drawn.
That's a very interesting point, and it leads me to my next question. And we're talking about safe spaces. We're talking about what spaces that students in school, what that should look like. And so, I'm reminded that the importance of that and creating a space where students can talk about these issues and really kind of divulge it, and how does that affect them? How does that impact their education? So, David, you have a very unique story. You identified a need at your former high school for a safe space. Can you just tell us a little bit about that and what having that safe space meant to you back then?
Yeah. So my first 2 years of high school, my freshman year was virtual, so I wasn't really in my school building. But then sophomore and mid junior year, I attended the Newark School of Global Studies. I want to say Black students made up about 2% of that school, or at least the student body, and even less of the school staff. So it was just a lot of tension. I would say when there are few Black students in a primarily non-Black space, tension is almost inevitable just because of, I guess, when we're looking at racism as a system, there's always someone who needs to have the power. And it's never Black students who hold the power. So we were in this space, the few non-Black students and I, and there were a number of reasons why we felt uncomfortable, but not to get into all that right now. It eventually led me to creating a Black student union within my school, which was not, thank you, which was not only, just a safe space or a club, but a way to empower us with a stronger voice, sort of to hand us a microphone or a megaphone so that we're not just sitting around complaining about these things that are happening to us, but reaching out to our school board and our policymakers to actually create change and mitigate these issues as opposed to just letting them linger.
Yeah, and that's really powerful, and at the high school level, doing something like that takes a lot, And I know, Christian, you're at Keene University right now, but as a Newark Public Schools alumnus, like, have you had any trouble finding a safe space, either that be in high school and now at Keene? Like, what's your experience been in schools?
So at Keene University, it is a Latino serving institution, so I have found my safe space. I really felt at home at Keene. Overall, in North School, I didn't feel safe in my space. Not only because my culture wasn't there, but because overall I couldn't find people that had the same culture, like basic culture and traditions as me. My safe space overall was speech and debate here in New Jersey. It's one of the reasons why I'm able to speak on here today. Um, it really showed me the power that Latino students have when they have a microphone, the speeches, the way they speak, the influence, and overall the legislation that is being spoken about. Um, that was my safe space. Speech and debate will always and forever be my safe space. Speaking out on issues that need to be spoken about.
Yeah, absolutely. You're doing that today. Again, and it's so important to carve out these spaces and talk about this because, as we talk about these high level kind of policies and things like that, we don't talk about the granular things in school. And so back to our educators, Mark, you worked at charter schools and, I guess to my question, specifically when it comes to students in charter schools, perhaps students who have maybe disengaged from the traditional public school system, how have you seen the effects of segregation play out in that sense?
Sure. I just to contextualize a little bit. So I was a teacher in Newark Public Schools for 8 years, and then was a principal in Newark Public Schools for 4. and then a head of school at a charter school for another 4 years. I know I don't look that old, but I am. Those schools, both the NBOE school and the charter school, were serving what we call opportunity youth. So it was 16 to 21-year-olds who had disconnected from school for any number of reasons, incarceration, pregnancy, a host of homelessness, a host of reasons. It's interesting because I was just telling this story earlier today. When I was a teacher, I taught in the North Ward, predominantly Latino students. And when I became a principal, I was at the Re-Engagement Center, which was in the Central Ward. There was a staff member who taught with me, a Black woman who taught with me in the North Ward, and she came to teach and be part of the administration at the Re-Engagement Center. And we were about 2 months in, and she said something to me that always I think about it, and I just told the story earlier today. She said to me, Mark, we used to be in North Newark. She said, but now we're in Newark. And I looked at her like, what do you mean? Like and then I thought about it, I was like, I know exactly what you mean. And what I realized was that there was a disproportionality in the young people who were being sent to schools or to the Re-Engagement Center. And disproportionately, it was our Black students, particularly our Black boys, who were ending up getting suspended, expelled, they were incarcerated, the litany of issues. And they were showing up at the Re-Engagement Center, which later became Uplift Academy, and then to our lead charter school. And there is a segregation that happens at a state level, right? As Dr. Payne and as was talked about earlier, but there's a segregation that's happening in the city, and it plays out, and we all kind of know it happens, right? Like, and we, as we should, applaud the brave young people who step up and say, there's a problem here that I'm experiencing. But for those of us who've been in the city for a long time, as have I, we have to reconcile that issue, right? And as a mentor always oftentimes challenges me, it is for young people to be part of that conversation and process of how we reconcile it, but it's not their problem to solve. It is our problem as adults that have been here for decades, who have seen it. We know it happens. We know the student mobility. We know who moves where. We know, right, like where the Black kids go. We know where the Latino kids go. We know in school buildings where the Latino kids hang out, and which is the Black kid table at the cafeteria. Like, we know those things. And in some ways, we've quietly accepted it as if it just is just regular, that's just the way things are. But I think if we don't have actual real conversations about it, and the last thing I'll say to this point is what I loved about working with Opportunity Youth, with young people who have been brave enough sometimes to walk away from the system because it's not working for them, is that you learn all of the things that are wrong with the system, because they will tell you. They will tell you the different schools they've gone to. They will tell you the different experiences that they've had. They will tell you what's happening in the community. And those stories are oftentimes consistent across those young people.
Yeah, and conversations, that's a really big point. That's what we're doing today, but there's also space to hold these conversations in classrooms. And so Yvette, when issues rooted in racial segregation come up in your class or with students, how have you created space for those conversations?
I've got to let them know I understand, and it's all about empathy. And first of all, I've got to show that it's a safe space. It's okay for you to be here. It's okay for you to feel it, validation. Absolutely, Denise. But not only that, if you feel scared, if you feel as if somebody is bullying you, it's okay to come in my room. And I've had that more than once. Somebody is banging on my door. Is it okay if I stay in here? And so the experience that several teachers who I know have had is that creating safe spaces, also acting as advisors in clubs where you've got to figure out how am I reaching other cultures? How am I drawing them in? Because as Christian said, he didn't feel as if he was a part of anything. His culture wasn't there. How can you feel like that? Imagine that. Imagine if you didn't feel as if you were validated in any way. Your culture wasn't. How isolating is that for somebody? So I know last year I was the advisor for a student council, and we were trying to figure out, okay, so what are we doing? And students said, well, we can have an open mic where everybody is having an opportunity to speak and do that, so everybody wouldn't feel as if, Mark said, in the cafeteria and the Blacks are over here and the Latinos are over here and the Asians are over here. So everybody feels as if it's a part. So all of that is so important. However, unless the administration acknowledges it, the administration wraps their arms around these ideas and these ideals, unfortunately, it's a problem for you as an educator.
Yeah, and Mark, kind of a similar question too. Like how, I mean, we know racial segregation is a problem in schools, but how does racial segregation create and I guess perpetuate the school-based inequities among students of color? You sort of touched a little bit upon that.
So say the question one more time for me.
Yeah. How does racial segregation create and perpetuate school-based inequities among students of color?
Yeah, I'm thinking about something that Ms. Jordan said that just I was reading recently a researcher who was talking about one of their core principles when they think about researching particular communities that they may not be a part of. And in this case, he was talking specifically around research of indigenous cultures. And as a white man, what he said was that whenever he enters into that space, if people act in a way that he believes to be unreasonable, he automatically stops and goes back to what are the assumptions he's making? What is the knowledge that he's lacking? What's the context he does not have? Because that action, while may seem unreasonable to him, was reasonable for the person who made that choice. And I say that to say that in thinking about the impact of racial segregation in our schools, there are many, the students, staff also, but I'm talking about young people specifically, may behave in ways that seem unreasonable. It's like, why would you do that? Like, why would you drop out? Why would you come to school late? Why would you cut fifth period? Why would you, the list goes on and on and on. The problem, I think, oftentimes is that as educators, we don't approach the conversation or the inquiry from a positionality of, it seems unreasonable to me, but clearly I don't have some information that I need because it was reasonable for the young person. Instead, we make a decision that they are unreasonable. And oftentimes the they are Black or Latino. And unfortunately, if I was going to get in trouble, I would have been in trouble already. Unfortunately, oftentimes the people who are making the judgment that that child is unreasonable looks like that child in this city. Let's be honest. Let's call it what it is. There is, I thoroughly enjoy listening to Dr. Payne every time I get a chance to. And Dr. Payne, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I would argue that there is a generation, that there are still, some alive of our ancestors' generation who dreamed of a day where a city would have a Black mayor and a Latino superintendent and would have the infrastructure we have in this city. And I just want to make sure, as a son of this city, who lives in this city, who's raising children in this city, married to a daughter of this city, that we don't miss what the opportunity is in this city to transcend circumstance for our young people, and that we don't adopt the thinking that was quite frankly used on us when it wasn't us who was leading this city. And so I just think that there's racial segregation. We see it. We see it in our city. In some ways, we passively accept it. But I think part of at the root of that racial segregation is a devaluing of the brilliance that exists in Black and brown people. And we got to make sure we don't perpetuate and overlook that brilliance that exists in our Black and brownness.
And Ms. Yvette, you've been nodding your head.
Yeah, I was. I just want to piggyback on what you were saying, and that is when students are showing up, and I see this every single day, and they're late, habitually late, or they come in your classroom and it's like, I don't feel like doing any work. Or, and then folks are asking, well, why are they always showing up late? And they tell you, I've got to bring my sister to school, or I got 2 siblings I've got to walk, and we have no car. I've got no tickets for a bus, so I've got to walk them and then walk over here, and there's no empathy. There's no understanding. And then it's like, see, you don't want to learn. Otherwise, you would show up on time. Or you're cutting. Why are you cutting? I fell asleep. Why'd you fall asleep? Well, there was a lot of noise in my apartment last night, so I didn't really sleep. You have to understand the circumstances that so many of our children are experiencing each and every day, and still have the high expectations that you should have for each and every student who is in front of you. It's a responsibility as an educator, and take it seriously. And this is a commercial. I'm sorry, Lauren, I wasn't going to say it. It's just I'm going to say it now. Lauren Wells, who is sitting over there, wrote a book recently. There are no deficits here. And you have to have that mindset. It's on Amazon, or you can go downtown and buy it at that bookstore, you know. So anyway, what I'm going to say is that you have to have, as an educator, a mindset. Every child in front of you has the ability to learn. You must. Otherwise, our kids are hit. That's one of my sayings, hit.
I love it. This is so important, you know, when we're discussing these issues, again, rooted in systemic segregation. And so back to our students, Christian, I'll have you go first. So again, we're discussing these issues. How do you hope things change? Is there anything that can change? What would you like to change?
I would like to see updated curriculums. I would like to see the removal of, zip code barriers that often plague the reason why we're not able to go to different schools. I would like to see, I guess, an overall I don't know how to explain this. I would like to see Newark Public Schools really show love for their schools, honestly. The love that the schools receive now isn't as much as I would love it to see. Overall, I would just like Newark to really see the students and see the opportunities that they can create for their students, giving them more opportunities, like having students get their associate's degree at their senior year. That's amazing. That's an opportunity I was not able to receive. But I would like to see Newark create and publish and promote these opportunities, because these students are really smart. I have met so many students who would literally not look like the students who would dominate in a subject, but they do. I have met students who actively know knowledge that most students wouldn't know. They're passionate about these subjects. They're passionate about robotics. They're passionate about chemistry. There are so many students that show so much potential here in Newark. And I really, really, really am sad to see that Newark doesn't take advantage of the fact that there are students who want to learn these subjects. There are students who want to see an updated curriculum. There are students who want to live and be in a better school. Like, these schools are looking pretty run down. They are 50, maybe 60 years old. These schools need remodeling. The students want to be in a school with air conditioning, like he said, or heaters. students want to be in a school with better lunches or like overall better meals, because some of these foods are horrible. When I tell you horrible, I would like to see Newark show love to the schools. That's what I want to see.
Absolutely. And David, same question to you. How do you hope things change? Is there anything that can?
In addition to everything he just said, because I agree 100%, sort of to Mark's point, I would say it's an especially cruel thing to be surrounded by people in power who look like you and have absolutely no compassion for the things that you're going through and the experiences that they claim to have also lived. So I would like to see a change in leadership pretty much across the board, because yeah, it's important to have people who look like you, but if they have no compassion for the things you've been through, if they are only a color, it really makes no difference.
And we're going to talk about the same thing with our educators. So we'll start with you, Yvette. What would you like to see? And more specifically, how do you think educators or other youth leaders can build awareness about school segregation and take action to, again, create change?
Well, I think that we need more educators who live here and who understand our students. And in terms of what I see is needed, I agree with you, Christian and David. Overhauling the curriculum is vital, and mandating certain things as African American history for every single student who actually implementing the law, which was Amistad in 2002, I believe. That should be mandated. And I'm sorry, I'm very emotional about this. We need educators, and maybe this comes from higher ed and what the new teachers and the pre-teacher program should teach also about culture in our schools and how important in urban education. I don't know if they do that or if they really understand it. Or maybe some of us ought to go in and have a seminar for them, and I'll bring Christian and David with me. Christian was like,
yes, please.
yes.
And Mark, same question to you. How do you think educators or again, youth leaders can build awareness about this topic to take action and create change?
I think piggybacking off of some of what was said, I think part of it is what's in the curriculum, right? Like, so what are our young people reading? I think our young people should be reading Coates, right? And Baldwin, and Perdomo and Chavez and, Wright and Morrison, and the list goes on, right? And it's also, by the way, one of the things that I think when I mentioned that let's not miss some of the opportunities we have. Like the authors I just mentioned are being banned in many school districts across this country. Nobody better suggest we ban those in Newark. No one would, right? So the barrier is not that. I'm not 100% sure I'm clear what the barrier is, but like young people should know exactly who everybody I just said is and have read that content and grappled with it. I think also part of how we get there, to David's point, is, and I believe it's Paulo Freire who talks about this idea of mutual recognition. It's like I see you in me, and you see me in you, and we, go to the root of the idea of educate. If you think about what the word educate means, it means to draw out, right? It means that there is something in here that you have already. My job as an educator is to figure out how I get it to surface, because there's nothing that these young men are not already thinking about, grappling with, experiencing, feeling, that I need to come and all of a sudden somehow deposit in them. They don't have it. They don't know it. I need to teach it to them. They got it. It's obvious, right? How do we foster classrooms that create environments that allows that to surface and bubble up so that the teacher or the educator is a facilitator of that drawing out, and less, this idea of, which is definitely Paulo Freire, this banking theory, right? Like you're an empty vessel and I just have to insert, because that has a power dynamic to it, right? That power dynamic plays itself out oftentimes racially. This idea that Black and brown young people, and particularly since I sit at MBK, Black and brown boys have nothing to offer. And so we have to discipline them. We have to teach them. We have to control them. We have to give them some things because they don't have it. And I think I would love to see environments where we don't do that and we don't begin with a theory of control and discipline and deficit, to use that language. But we foster environments where the things that they're already thinking about are able to surface.
Yeah, very well said. And we can talk about this for hours. And our panelists have been so great and really provided a wealth of knowledge. But I have one last question for everyone. And, if there is one thing you want everyone to take away from here, what is that? And we can start with you, Ms. Yvette.
I think I want everybody to understand that, and I'm talking everybody here, if you're watching a live stream or if you watch it a couple of days or months later, and that is that all students can learn. There are no deficits here, none. They have to have that mindset. I'm talking about educators and administrators alike. And without that, there is a problem. In terms of segregation, however, you have to also understand that because of the circumstances that so many of us find ourselves in, it is a challenge for us also. I'm talking Black and brown people who are sitting in front of people who do not look like us to excel. So because of the mindset that Mark referenced earlier. So we have to actually walk in understanding everybody is equal. That's the ideal.
Absolutely. And Christian, same question to you. What is one thing you'd like to share with, our folks here, folks on a live stream?
I would like to tell my fellow peers, please vote. You have a voice. Use your voice. Ustedes tienen una voz. Pueden dar su voz, por favor. I don't know how to say vote in Spanish because I'm Latino, but not that Latino. But please vote. You have a chance to make change. There's so many things that we can change. So many opportunities that we can create for ourselves. I really, really hope that my fellow peers, my Latinos, my Black and brown students, I hope that they are listening and that they're watching this live stream and that they tell their friends about it. Tell their friends to wake up or wake up their friends. Tell everyone to please vote.
David, same question.
Mark mentioned something about this earlier, but I suppose I would say these issues we're discussing about today, and even broader issues that we haven't had time to touch on yet, they are not the students' responsibility to solve. This is something I've preached my entire high school career. And it's sort of like, I suppose, both literally and figuratively, we've been handed used, busted up books and told to make the best of it. We are absolutely deserving of more. And the generation that is to come after me is also deserving of more. And it starts here, not just with the students, but with the adults who are seeing these issues and complaining about them and talking about them, but not taking their feelings beyond that, not taking action, just speaking about it always, not doing anything to fix it.
I'm gonna take that charge and think about what I'm taking away. So I'm a PK, I'm a preacher's kid. So if I can take you out of church for a second. But I could hear my father asking me, like, what do you have in your hand? Right? Like Moses finds himself at the Red Sea It's like, what am I gonna do? God's like, what do you have in your hand? And I think that there is a lot of complaining that we adults do about the city and about what we don't like, and it's very easy to tear down. It is much harder to build up. And the question for us, I think, as a community is to think about what is it that we have in our hands? Because I think we have a lot of opportunity. I think there's a lot of things that we can do. This is our city. It is literally us, right, who have the decisions to make. And so, I just read a book by Michelle Foster called Black Teachers on Teaching. And the thread in that book, as they interviewed teachers from across the country, some who taught during segregation pre-1954, the number one thread that I took out of that book, and it was interesting because I'm reading the book and I can hear the voices of some of our elders like Clement Price and others, right? Like I could hear their voices in these teachers telling about what they lost the minute the schools became integrated. And I would ask that we look at what we have in our hands. What is it that we are able to do? What are the opportunities that exist? And how do we focus on those things and not just join the complaining? Young people have a right to complain and cry out and say, I need and I deserve this. The adults should not say, you're right, that's what you deserve, and complain with them. We have to respond. And I think we have a ton of assets in our ecosystem that should allow us to do that and do that well.
Absolutely. Folks, let's give our panelists a big round of applause. I know there's a lot we did not get into, and there's a lot more that we could discuss, but for the sake of time, we're going to turn it over to some questions and answers. Oh, wow. All right. All right, we can just start, I guess, over here and work our way down.
Whoa, that was a lot, definitely to digest. It's not really a question. I just want to just affirm that everything that you're saying is absolutely right, Mark, because I feel like it's a bigger issue. I think we need to define who the stakeholders are, because when I look at the disparities, those stakeholders don't necessarily live in our city. They educate here, they come here for work in different capacities, they take those resources back to their homes, wherever that is, and leave us with whatever's left that we have to now sift through. And that will eventually become our educational system, which is what? If they don't live here, if they're not educated here, like you said, educate here, don't know the challenges that the students have to go through every single day, no green space in the schools or near the schools that they're using, like I was just talking about earlier. Out of all 60 plus schools, how many actually know what athletics are in the 5th grade, not just high school? Why are we competing for green space and it's not available to them? Why are we in a town with 3 different colleges and they're not at the helm of every school that's in the city? Like, why is that a thing that is separated? Why is diversity even a conversation that is optional? You know, like, why aren't there Zoom calls? If the club is here at one school teaching Spanish, why is that now? If it's not available in a school in the Southport, why is that not available in all schools? Right. So I just think it's a matter of the resources are here, but everybody's so segmented, siloed. They're like, hoarding the resources just for this particular space or these 4 walls. But we have to think outside of that. We have to think about the 60 plus that just may not be able to come to your school, but there's technology available that still should make things accessible. Thank you.
Awesome. Just to clarify, questions are also open to Dr. Payne as well. And Mark, you can come over here if you'd like to sit down. Yeah. Oh, you can sit over.
Themselves before they-
Huh?
So I'm Maggie Freeman. I kind of wear many hats. Today I'm representing Weekway Park community. I do environmental, I do sports and recreation, mentor youth. Also have ran for office or school board. I've done a lot of different things and have learned a lot of information throughout my years. I think we even tried to connect some time ago and I met you too while you were advocating at the public school. level at global studies. Yeah, and even I did try to come and bring resources and was met with a closed door, no entry in. So not only are the schools not open to actual community that's trying to gain access, it's an impossible feat when we knock at the door and we're presented the people who live here who are stakeholders and care and pay for this treatment. That's really what that's the sad part. We pay to be mistreated. And it's terrible. I mean, I don't know how to rewrite history, but all I can say, a new history has to be better than what it is now. Yep.
So I'm gonna come from a different angle. My angle that I'm coming from is we need to change the language. We sit here and say public schools, but where's the charter school children that should be sitting here? Because their experiences is exactly like their experiences. But all we tend to do is highlight the traditional public schools experience. We don't talk about the charter schools where they felt the math and reading on the state exam, why the state won't release it. Because if the state released it for the largest city in Newark, who's supposed to set the national standard, because we'll get there first, they'll learn that the charters are failing our children in math and reading. So we have to begin to change the language. If we talking about segregated, then it's segregated here, because public school, when you talk about it, is charter school and traditional public school. And that information needs to be put out here. Let's stop playing that it's only in the traditional public school. The second, when we talk about segregated schools in our community, you want to know why everything is segregated? I'm 64 years old, so I was here in this city when we couldn't go into the different wards, and the different wards were segregated. When my mother had to run us from Irvington back to Newark, because the people that was Caucasian in Irvington didn't want us at Baldwin Street Pool. So you want to talk about segregation? I do know, young man, what you're talking about. And that's why you see me at every board meeting advocating for you. The issue is when we need to change the language in this community that we don't have the resources. Because the resources are here, sir. We're just not claiming the resources. We're not telling the elected officials down in Trenton to take the charter schools out the public school budget, put them in either the marijuana budget or either the gambling pot that's over $1 billion. Fund them out of there, let your traditional public school be funded at the full rate so we can get the rehab we need done, so we can get the modernization that we need done. Because we keep sitting up here thinking poor. We are not poor. We are disadvantaged, but we are not poor. When you say segregated, we are segregated only because we still have the shackles on our brains that we won't give up from our ancestors. When this young man said, what I have to tell my peers is they need to vote, that's what you have to do. Because we got an older generation that say voting don't count. That's not true. If we voted as Black Republicans, I'm a Democrat, and she Republican. And we work bipartisan with each other all the time, advocating in education. Because whether you Green Party, Republican, or Democrat, it's your agenda that counts, not your party that counts. So if we're talking about segregation and how to abolish it, it's to stop acknowledging it and acknowledge the issues that is wrong with it. Not acknowledge the language, because the minute you change the language, you will change the mindset in Newark, New Jersey. The party that we have here, and I tell our school board all the time, how our children's score is not raised. All our children need is penmanship back into the school, phonics back into the school, vocabulary back into the school, and you will see the test scores rise. Stop taking our kids because they're on the first grade level and still trying to teach them on the first grade level. If they're in second grade, give them second grade work. Bring them back to the level that they belong. So I'm going to pass this because I can go on forever.
Ms. Denise, we're going to have you on the next panel.
Captain Denise Cole. I am a free education advocate in North New Jersey, and I attend mostly every board meeting. They hate to see me coming. I want to say this to everybody. Stop being a thermometer. A thermometer takes the temperature in the room and decide whether they want to speak. Be like me. I'm a thermostat. I changed the temperature in the room. See how I just changed it?
I have a question for you. I have a question for you. Are you saying, and I want to make sure we're clear about this, are you saying, okay, segregation may not be an issue, whatever. Are you saying leave it alone and kind of what Dr. Payne is saying, focus on the issue of educating the kids and make sure the resources are there so that they can achieve, they can learn?
Now, let me tell you, he want to ask that question? No, I believe segregation is an issue, but what I believe is that we harp too much on segregation because it's not segregation that's the issue, it's race that's the issue. The color of my skin is the issue. The color of your skin is the issue. When we have Latinos who are dark skinned and Latinos who are light that can pass for white, discriminate against an Afro-Latino, that's a problem. When you have an African immigrant that come here to America and discriminate against me, a born African in America through my ancestors, and you discriminate and look against me, that's racism.
So
That's what caused the divide in our community because we don't talk about it. We use nice little words like segregation because it makes y'all all feel good. But when we talk about white and black, African on black, black on black, when we talk about Latino on Latino, when we talk about Brazilian on Brazilian, when we talk about Cuban on Cuban and Puerto Rican on Puerto Rican, now we get uncomfortable. That's what causes it.
So what should be done about this issue of, and I'm going back to this word, segregated schools in New Jersey, because that's the issue. The word is
Well, the segregated schools in New Jersey exist because NJEA, some of their very members don't want their kids in schools with people who look like us. So, and that's one of the very people that come into our school system and train our school board. And when I sit at school board meetings and they stifle my voice because they look like me but don't want to hear from me because I'm gonna tell the truth, that's what the problem is. You talk about segregated, we are oppressed through people who don't want to hear the voice of someone like me who is a progressive, who's saying, I don't care what you look like. I don't care what party you in, I'm willing to work with you. I don't care the color of your skin. If your agenda is mine and you're a parent like me or a community member and you want a safe place for your child, so do I. If you want clothes on your back and be able to put clothes on your children's back, so do I. If you want to have money and a living wage, so do I. So as parents, where are we different? No matter what color we are, we want the same things for our generations of children.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Denise. We're gonna have you on the next one, I promise. Go ahead, next one.
So hello, everybody. So much here. My name is Sheila Montague. I'm a district leader, educator. I went to Shabazz. I graduated from Barringer. Also went and graduated from Keene. I'm a native Newarker. I've been here all my life, and so much of what was said here tonight resonated with me. I'm also an educator, a lifelong educator. And the first thing I ever stood up in front of City Council for was the book Segregation that existed in Vellsburg. But when I was working at Flag for 10 years, it was non-existent. Whatever we needed in terms of listening equipment for students who were listeners other than, we just had everything and we didn't have those things over here. That started a trajectory of negativity. And so when we talk about debate, because I was always on the debate team, we analyze situations and we base opinions on facts, right? And I've been a lifelong debate coach as well. But in the real world, your opinions are sometimes taken to be complaining. And I want to share these thoughts with no disrespect to anybody else, but to the brother Marco, I respect everything that you just said. Hopefully you can hear what I want to say, respectfully, because that's my intent, right? To just share a difference in opinion. He said something about tearing down and complaining, right? And those words matter because they create an energy, right? because I'm agreeing with you. And, you know, when people have political friends, right? And this needs to be said, they take the friendship, right, and on one level, and they're not looking at the facts and the opinions of others that may differ based on different facts that may be in receipt of or whatever. But the point is this, right? It's not about complaining. It's about having a difference of opinion. And right now we're talking about segregated schools, but we have segregated leadership, right? That feels like democracy for all people is unacceptable. And I love the fact that you said that tonight. This is not to me about Latino or Black. And anyone who knows me, I'm a very pro-Black person. But because I'm an educator, I love all kids. I love all people. So this is a lot of racism, but it's also classism, right? And it has always been. There's a lot of focus on what we need to learn about our history. We all do. You have a history. All of us have a history here in this world, period, right? But what about business? Why are we not talking about that? And I think that we're spending way too much time, right? We're using race and our history as a distraction. Our kids want money and they should have it. Those opportunities should bring earning potential, right? And so if we're just going to say, oh, we're going to cite all of these historians, all of those things are important, but they all have a place, right? And so it's not just about that. Somebody said something about educators. Whoa. It was so much said today. Somebody said something about the governor keeping something in legislation for a long time. I think that was you, Yvette. Somebody mentioned that earlier. Yeah, thank you for that. Right? And if you're listening, if they can keep something in legislation for a long time, right? Like 2002, the bill, Payne, the homicide. How long was that in legislation? Because they didn't have money, they couldn't move it. So we see that type of control. You think that control doesn't exist in the educational realm? Of course it does. They can change laws and change the trajectory of things overnight. Look how fast they changed the laws to protect when Biden got in office. Who did he just change the laws to protect? Help me out. The Asians, thank you, the Asian hate crime bill. Implemented, passed right away. But here we are, 2002, that homicide bill, even though it was passed, it's being disrespected. Our thoughts, our democracy is being disrespected. I want to say, I want to probably finalize by saying congratulations to Lauren Wells on her book, right? Because I know the intent of it. But I do want to say that I have a different opinion in terms of, in terms of the deficiencies. If our kids, right, under the leadership that we currently have, which is a decade long, right, is scoring 4 out of 5 kids cannot read. Don't tell me there's nothing wrong with that. There's something huge that's wrong with that. 4 out of 5 of our kids in the 3rd grade, and this is this month, this is a recent article. And I think the author might be in here, I don't know. 4 out of 5 kids can't read. This is not about your friendship anymore. This is about the outcomes of our young people. And I'm going to say this as an educator. Our young people, please, I love what you said today. Keep that going, because what you think is based on facts, right? And it's not on relationships. It's not on social conditioning, right? And understand that when you have your differences in opinions, people will go against you just because they can know that you're right. But because they're so affiliated and the friendships mean so much, don't tell me that the fact that billions of dollars, first of all, we got $1 billion school district here in the city of Newark. I worked in other districts, I don't need to say their name, they didn't have half that, and they were performing. So it's more than segregation, right? It's a politic that exists. I'm not certain that big government in our schools is good, because there's an internal inherent conflict of interest, right? If I could keep all the kids scoring low, the people who run this country, those corporations that work together, keep people working at Amazon, keep people working at FedEx, right? Keep those prisons filled. You understand what I'm saying?
And thank you for those points. Since I know we can talk about this all day.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna close it because y'all, I
For
know that
sake of
nobody
time.
ever, but I'm gonna say, I know that no one ever really wants me to speak. Thank you. I know, but no one ever really wants me to speak. And like I said, I'm just glad that I got the chance to hear these young people say that today. And because they did the same thing when I ran for mayor. I was a teacher. I ran for mayor here, and they shut me down even in the media. They wouldn't talk about it. So like I said, keep lifting your voice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And for the sake of time, does anyone have a question? This was great. I love it, but we gotta get a question in. Ms. Montague, no disrespect to you. Yes, ma'am, I do.
He has one right here.
Isn't that a young person?
You got a young person with a question? Nope.
Yeah. Aren't there young people right there?
Go ahead. We got room for 2 more questions and then we gotta wrap up.
Good evening. I am Stephanie Jones, born and raised in Newark, Harriet Tubman, all the way up to university, and I am a teacher here. These are my students. So my question was, and I don't know if you answered it earlier, so that's why I was willing to let it go. But I just want to know, in terms of segregated schools, do you think it's more about people choosing to put their children and their families in situations where the school is perceived to be better? Or do you think it's because we're just choosing to go to places and spaces where we feel safe? Because I have 2 daughters in Newark Board of Education currently right now. So I wonder what the panelists thought about that.
Can I take, because I was going to say, I didn't realize it was you, Stephanie. I would have mentioned your book too. But I do think that. And Central High School, for those of you who don't know, it's one of the newer in terms of edifices in Newark. So it's seen as, oh, it's a beautiful school. I mean, physically beautiful school. And a lot of families want their students there, or children rather. And I've heard from students and from parents that exact same thing. I don't want my son or daughter attending X or Y school. This school is safer and I want them there. So yeah, some of the segregation is, I think, a part of that. Yeah.
Dr. Wells had a question.
Thank you for the panel. Thank you, Ms. Jordan, for reading my book and plugging it. I appreciate that. I attended Dwight Morrow High School in the 80s. I graduated in 1990. So I was there during the escalation of the desegregation case and the battles that ensued. And my question, I have a comment, which is the experience that I had was very much about creating an environment that policed us, that became more punitive, that was about making the school appear that we, meaning the students, were fit to be in school with the children of the parents who were sending them elsewhere. And that environment was toxic, it was harmful, it created an inferior educational experience for us. And so my question and my concern is, what do we know about what has happened in terms of desegregation in these places where it has occurred? Do we know anything more beyond moving students and increasing student enrollment? Do we actually know what the experiences of the students who are in the home districts like Inglewood are, and how they compare to the students who are being bused from Inglewood Cliffs or from other students in the county, because it is intra-district choice? And if we do know that, how should we be using that information to help us think about how to respond to the environment now and in the conversation that we're having? And so, Ms. O'Day, since I think Dr. Payne indicated you're the one who has more information about that, I'd like to know, what do we know about what has happened in these places where desegregation has been attempted, and how has it impacted the students who are in schools that where they are perceived as the deficit, and the environmental changes are about making that place culturally assimilative for students from other locations?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think we really don't know. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I think Dr. Payne's center maybe would be well fit to do a study. Yeah, you know, the only things that we really know are those things that are so imperfect. We look at test scores, we look at percentage of kids in AP classes or in the IB or the dual enrollment. We look at graduation rates, we look at who goes to college, but we really don't have any sense, I don't think, I certainly don't, about the feelings of the kids in there. And that's why earlier when we were talking about possible solutions, I mean, I think that it's really easy for anybody who's not a part of it to say, well, it would be great if we combined this district and this district, but if none of the people involved, if none of the students want to be part of that, then that would be a horrible decision to make. So I think it's really right. And I think that was part of, I was very young when that happened, so I was not paying attention. I was too young to be paying attention, but not when you went to school, but when it was, you know, when the combinations were made in those two cases, you know, I think it was just kind of part of the atmosphere, right? There was an atmosphere in the country or maybe in the state where people didn't know what solution to make, so they thought, okay, let's put these two together and see what happens. But I mean, I think the same thing is true in Morristown, which I know a little bit more about because I covered it. They at least when I was, it's been more than 10 years since I was working there, but there was still, you know, race problems among Black and white students in the school, and you had this large Hispanic population moving in, and that was just kind of, I think muddling the issue as well. So really, somebody needs to do that kind of study. I think that'd be really important.
And folks, just for the sake of time, I'm so sorry, but we're going to have to close the evening. The library closes at 8, and if we do not get out, I will get in trouble. But with that being said, you know, I want to thank all our panelists here. I appreciate everyone's time very much. Thank you for everyone for letting us come into your community and talk about these issues. Again, a big thank you to NJ Spotlight, WNYC, and our supporters at the Center for Cooperative Media for hosting this evening with us. Feel free to come up and chat with us. Thanks.
Yes. Thoroughly.
Christian, you were phenomenal. I'm so impressed by you. Are you staying on campus?
Yes.
You have a ride? You have a ride back? Okay.
Thank you
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
David, you were great.